the watcher in the pines. 1,000 miles from civilization, a house stands where a family once lived. They left no note, no bodies, and no reason. Only silence, and the lingering scent of old pine and unending dread. The call came on a Tuesday. Not the screaming, frantic kind of call, but the quiet, official one that sinks into your bones like winter cold. Agent Miles, the voice on the line said, clipped and impersonal, "We need you on the Van Horn case." Straight out of the Bureau's jurisdiction, but the local sheriff is out of his depth. The family has vanished. I was a missing person specialist, but my expertise leaned toward runaway teens and custody disputes, not the kind of clean, utter disappearance the caller implied. Still, when the Bureau calls, you go. The Van Horn property was tucked away in the deep woods of the Pacific Northwest, a place where the air hung heavy with the smell of damp earth and ancient pines. It was so remote that the satellite navigation on my rugged Bureau-issue SUV failed 20 miles out, forcing me to rely on a faded, hand-drawn map. The final stretch was a barely maintained logging track that clawed its way up a steep incline. When I finally reached the clearing, the first thing that struck me was the silence. It wasn't the peaceful quiet of nature, it was a profound, suffocating absence of sound. No birdsong, no rustle of leaves, no chirping of insects. Just the wind whistling a desolate tune through the surrounding woods. The house itself was a sprawling, custom-built timber frame, beautiful in a rustic, expensive way. It was a home designed for a family, the Van Horns, Thomas, a retired tech executive, Clara, his artist wife, and their 2 children, 16-year-old Maya and 10-year-old Leo. I met Sheriff Rooker on the porch. He was a man worn down by the job and the solitude of his jurisdiction, his face etched with worry. "Agent," he nodded, his voice a gravelly whisper. "You won't find anything. We've been over this place 4 times. Nothing." "Start from the beginning, Sheriff," I instructed, pulling on latex gloves. It was Sunday. A neighbor, the closest one, which is 5 miles away, called in a welfare check. Said he hadn't seen any smoke from the chimney since Friday. I drove up, saw the car in the garage, but no one answered. The back door was unlocked. We stepped inside. The interior was pristine. Too pristine. The kind of perfect that felt like a stage set. There were no signs of struggle, no forced entry, nothing stolen. The house was fully stocked, food in the fridge, clothes in the closets, even a half-finished board game of Monopoly on the living room rug. "Look at this," Rooker pointed to the kitchen counter. A coffee cup, half full, sat next to a bowl of uneaten oatmeal. It looks like they stopped mid-meal. Left their lives right in the middle of a Sunday morning. The most unsettling detail, the one that snagged my professional eye, was the family dog, a golden retriever, named Charlie. His collar was by the door, and his food bowl was full. Charlie, a large, well-trained animal, was also gone. No dog would willingly leave its food and its family, especially not without its collar. The architect's blueprint, a mystery of design. I spent the next 2 days immersed in the house, searching for the crack in the facade. The absence of evidence was a screaming clue in itself. People don't vanish without leaving some trace of panic, a spilled drawer, a broken window, or a final communication. I found my first true anomaly in the basement. It was a huge space, half dedicated to a spotless home gym and the other half a temperature-controlled wine cellar. I wasn't looking for bodies, but I checked every dark corner. Behind the wine racks, tucked beneath a layer of dust that suggested it hadn't been moved in years, I found a hidden wall safe. It was open. Inside, there was a single, rolled-up sheet of brittle parchment, an original architectural blueprint of the house. It wasn't a standard construction blueprint. It was annotated, covered in Thomas Van Horn's precise, cramped handwriting. But it wasn't the wiring or plumbing he was marking. He had circled sections of the foundation, the load-bearing walls, and the roofline, drawing strange, geometric symbols I didn't recognize. They looked like a cross between complex mathematical equations and old-world runes. The most prominent notation was on the diagram of the master bedroom wall, facing the woods. In bold, red ink, Thomas had written one word, underlined multiple times: the gap. "Sheriff, I need you to find the architect," I said, showing him the blueprint. "And I need a structural engineer. I think the house itself might be the key." The emotional scar, Maya's room. While Rooker began his search for the architect, I went back to the second floor. Maya's room was typical of a rebellious, artistic teen. Posters of obscure indie bands, half-finished canvases, and a general air of creative chaos. But here, finally, I felt the first brush of real emotion. On her corkboard, amidst ticket stubs and photos, was a drawing. It was a sketch in charcoal, done with unnerving detail. It showed the family, father, mother, little brother, and Maya, standing in the living room, but they were all looking up, their faces frozen in identical masks of horror. And in the upper corner, sketched lightly but unmistakably, was a figure. Tall, unnaturally thin, and shrouded in darkness. It wasn't one of her band posters or a horror movie icon. It looked like an old legend given new life, a boogeyman with an impossible reach. Beneath the drawing, scrawled into the cork, was a journal entry, dated 3 weeks prior to the disappearance. "He's not leaving. He never moves, but he's always there. In the pines. Dad built this house to keep us safe, but he didn't realize the walls only keep you in. I saw the gap tonight. Not a gap in the fence. A gap in the world." And the watcher looked through it, right at me. "I'm so scared, but I can't tell Leo. I have to protect him. I just want to feel the sun again, not this cold shadow." Tears blurred my vision. This was a 16-year-old girl, grappling with something impossible, carrying the weight of her family's terror. The emotion of the case finally hit me. It wasn't just a mystery, it was a tragedy. The architect and the paranoia. Rooker called back a day later. The architect, a man named Elias Thorne, was dead. He'd committed suicide 5 years ago, shortly after the Van Horn house was completed. The official report cited acute paranoid delusion. But Rooker did find Thorne's widow. She spoke of her husband's final months. "He was obsessed," she whispered over the phone. "He said the house wasn't a home, it was a trap. He built it for Thomas, sure, but Thomas gave him the designs. The specific, insane designs. Elias said Thomas wanted to build a spiritual containment unit. Said he was trying to seal something out, or maybe, seal something in." Thomas Van Horn's background suddenly made sense. He hadn't just been a tech executive, he'd spent his later years funding obscure, esoteric research into paranormal, physics and ancient protective architecture. The strange symbols on the blueprint weren't runes, they were a fusion of ancient geometry and electromagnetic shielding concepts, Thomas's attempt to use the house as a physical barrier against something he believed was real. That the gap notation became terrifyingly clear. The truth in the wall, suspense builds. With the engineer's help, I located the exact spot of the gap, the master bedroom wall, facing the deepest, darkest part of the woods. It wasn't structural damage, it was a section of wall built with a slightly different density of wood, hollowed out and lined with a strange, dark resin. I had the engineer cut into it. Inside, there was no wiring, no pipes. Just a smooth, black surface, like polished obsidian. It was ice cold to the touch. As I shone my flashlight over the surface, I saw a new set of markings, not the architect's, but Clara Van Horn's. They were frantic, jagged lines of charcoal, mirroring the figures in Maya's drawing. And next to them, scrawled into the resin itself, a single, horrifying message. "It's not outside. It was here the whole time. It was just waiting to be let in." Suddenly, the whole narrative shifted. the family wasn't trying to keep something out. They were terrified of something that had already breached their defenses. Then, the engineer, a skeptical man in his late 40s, gasped. "Agent, look at the corner. Is that a handle?" He pointed to the bottom corner of the obsidian panel. There was a tiny, almost invisible indentation. I pressed it. With a soft, mechanical click, the entire panel slid inward, revealing a cavity. Inside, there was a single item. Not a clue, not a body, but a piece of evidence that broke the spell of the house and plunged me into true, paralyzing horror. It was 10-year-old Leo Van Horn's favorite stuffed animal, a worn, one-eyed plush dragon. The kind of comforting object a child would never willingly leave. But what made my blood run cold was that the dragon was not just in the cavity. It was flattened, pressed and dried, as if it had been sealed inside the wall when the resin was still wet. And covering the dragon, as thin as a glaze of frost, was a layer of fine, gray dust. Not construction dust. The engineer recognized it immediately. "Agent, this is human ash." The paranormal conclusion. I understood it then, the full, crushing horror of the Van Horn disappearance. Thomas Van Horn, in his intellectual arrogance, had sought to contain a reality-defying entity, the Watcher. He had built his house as a shield, believing his sophisticated geometry and rare materials could hold it back. But the gap was a flaw in his design, a literal tear in the fabric of their reality that the Watcher had been exploiting for weeks, glimpsed only by the sensitive eyes of his daughter, Maya. The family had lived in a pressure cooker of dread, their love and sanity fraying under constant, silent surveillance. Clara's message confirmed the final, terrifying twist. The Watcher wasn't stopped by the walls, it had simply used the house as a vessel. It was never outside in the pines. It was an invasive presence, something that had slipped through Thomas's elaborate defenses and had begun to exist inside the structure itself. The silence I first noticed was the key. It wasn't the sound of nature being quiet. It was the sound of a predator having already hunted and consumed its prey. The family had vanished not through a struggle, but through a slow, systemic dissolution. They hadn't run away from the breakfast table, they had simply been absorbed, metabolized by the house itself. The uneaten food, the half-played game, these were the final traces of their material lives, left behind as they were converted to whatever the Watcher required. Leo's dragon was the last physical proof of the tragedy, pressed into the obsidian like a macabre fossil. The ash on it, the remains of the Van Horns, suggested a complete physical and energetic breakdown, an entire family reduced to a thin film of gray particulate matter, woven into the very structure Thomas had built to protect them. I closed the obsidian panel, the click echoing with finality. I never found another trace, no body, no final message, no sign of Charlie the dog. The Van Horns were gone, wiped clean from the world, leaving behind a home that was no longer a dwelling, but a sealed tomb. I filed my report, a document of impossible theories and zero physical evidence, knowing it would be filed away as an unsolved mystery of the highest strangeness. I left the house, the silence in the woods no longer a mystery, but a certainty. The Watcher in the pines had been sealed away again, full and content, in its containment unit. And the house, beautiful and remote, stood, waiting for the next owner foolish enough to believe that a simple, beautiful dwelling in the middle of nowhere could keep the horrors of the world from finding their way inside. As I drove away, I glanced in my rearview mirror. The house was already swallowed by the shadows of the immense pines. But for a flicker of a second, I thought I saw it, a tall, unnaturally thin shadow that was not cast by any tree, stretching up from the roofline and receding into the woods, waving a slow, lingering farewell. And I knew, with the chilling certainty of a man who has looked into the gap, that the Van Horn case would never truly close. The house was now the monster, and the story of the family was simply its new, endless, terrifying heartbeat.